I'm fortunate enough to have, I think this will be my fourth year at Mexico. It's such a great show. It's really, it's the way it's organized in Cologne. It's very German in that it's efficient. You can get there easily, and every year the content sort of seems to get better and better. And there are many, many more sort of highly visible American influencers that are there from the major players in our industry. I think it's metaphorical, right? Because this year I know that Christian and Frank are introducing a broadcast track to really talk about, sort of the challenges that traditional media companies, specifically television broadcasters and video broadcasters, are having, foraying into digital. And as their business is migrating to purely digital distribution, what are the challenges? What's that disruption look like, et cetera? And if you take a step back, you look at the show the last 3 years, but our industry in general, I think there's been these kind of waves. Like Web 1.0 was display and search, and Web 2.0 was video and social. And we've sort of had this like intermediate of programmatic and automation and what all that is. And in Europe, it's something totally different because you have this construct of sales houses, and you have a different model for whose ad server wins the reconciliation battle, right? And you also have sort of a generally accepted practice that arbitrage and making a spread on the media is totally acceptable for agencies there. What's coming, I think, next is this huge disruption of traditional media, specifically Web 3.0, which is who owns the living room and what is the living room? And most importantly, what device is being watched in the living room? And based on what I hear this year coming out, I'm fortunate enough to get to moderate some of the panels. We're going to have some both traditional legacy broadcasters, distributors like the satellite operators out of Europe, and some of the MCNs at the table to talk about how they are sort of shepherding that transition and how the European market is different from the US, most importantly.
And what about the impact of data in decisioning? And we've been talking about this for a number of years. Where does that intersection at Mexico do you expect?
Well, again, going back to the fact that Europe isn't a country, right? And data and privacy are such, the level of sensitivity around those issues is so amplified in Europe compared to the US, right? The use of third-party data, addressability and targeting. It's not just because it's not a homogenized market in that regard, right? Not that the US is homogenized, but with local languages and localization and that need for content, how you actually have to deploy and deliver advertising is very different. But the use of data is typically parsed by country, right? So a lot of large companies can't just roll up a sort of pan-European high-level first-party data set. It has to be controlled and managed typically on a local market basis. So I think that although programmatic and automation is kind of, is accelerated, maybe even more so in Europe than it is here, mostly driven by the fact that you have such consolidation on the buy side and the sell side with the sales houses. And there are, sort of like three big dominant ones in Europe. I think it's, automation is moving quicker, but the adoption of actual addressability and targeting, specifically down to a PII, individual unique ID or first party level, is much slower to evolve because they have so many exclusions there. I think as a market also, these guys are kind of looking at Netflix is on fire in Europe, right? The activation rates and adoption of smart television and over-the-top platforms is also much higher than the US as well, which means that the disruption to traditional media providers is different but still great, right? And you have a lot of broadcasters in Europe that don't have the construct of paid distribution because you don't have the cable operator sort of construct there. A lot of nations, you have, like Germany and the UK, you have a license, right? You pay for a license and you get the BBC and Channel 4 and a few other stations. If you want to upgrade to Sky because you want sports, you can do that. But because of that, I think that the adoption of over-the-top and the high level of broadband penetration, and also the fact that we have such mature high bandwidth mobile networks, means that Europe has as equally of a great challenge for the traditional broadcasters and premium video content owners to actually sort of manage this next wave of disruption.
And actually, finally, for people who don't know about Mexico, might think about going, what is it about it that has made it work, and why do you think it's a special show?
Well, I think that Christian and Frank have done a good job of really separating the trade show part of it, which is invaluable if you want to sit down and talk to companies and learn about a marketplace, right? It's very efficient, it's very organized. But the programming and the curation around the content just gets better every year, right? It's not only that you have highly visible sort of folks from the US and executives coming for their keynotes. you're actually getting them in a different environment outside of their local marketplaces. And so I find that the conversations are much more evocative. They're sort of very candid. There's almost like there's like a safe space that exists on the stages at Mexico that is really refreshing, and you end up seeing this sort of much greater candor, which results in incredible content and incredible learning. I love the fact that it's easy to get to the show. Trains are easy, just simple stuff like that. And everybody that's there, they've schlepped the Cologne to Köln to go to Mexico only. So it's sort of, it's not the junket in the sense of like Cannes or other shows and Vegas. And people are just there to do really good business, and really good business gets done.